So the FT was started in 1888, so it had over 100 years really of being a traditional kind of media player. The first website was launched in 1995, but the real sort of transformation happened in 2007 when the FT launched what is called its metered model, and that essentially the decision was made that we didn't want to give away our journalism for free. So what we did is we set up a model whereby you needed to register for the content. You get a certain amount of articles to read each month, and after that you hit a paywall and need to pay for for additional access. And that set us up very nicely in a couple of ways, actually. One, it sort of put in place a data collection methodology. Because people had to register, we had really good information on people. We were able to link people across devices and things like that. So it meant we actually, almost by default, had a really great data set about people and how we wanted to target them. I think it's been an iterative process. I think the behavioural data, so what you might call the web analytics data, so who reads what pages, how what are the top stories, how people move around the site, where they come from, all that sort of stuff that's a relatively, I think, kind of almost industry standard set of data now. So collecting that data was pretty standard. The demographic data we collect about people has changed quite a lot over time. There have been various experiments with collecting the right data. And then the third set of data is about what you would call the metadata, so the data that describes the other data, if you will. So if somebody have an article, you want to know what the article's about, what sections it appear in, who wrote the article. And that sort of latter set of data is something that we spent quite a lot of time over the last year or so trying to understand how we improve that data set, and that's a big focus for us. But I think, generally, I think it's been an iterative kind of learning process, because not many companies had done this kind of stuff before. So we had to, we sort of, to a certain extent, be making up as we go along, taking the data sets that we have, some of which are standard, some of which are not standard, and really working out which data works best for us. So, for example, we know that demographic data is most useful to us for selling advertising, but the behavioural data is most useful to us in terms of understanding our customers' behaviour and being able to predict what they're going to do next. So different data sets play different roles. We actually just this week, in fact, have launched a new product for the editorial team, which takes our new data set that we started collecting around behaviour and puts that into a very editorially focused way. So that's a product that's been developed in conjunction with our colleagues in editorial and our colleagues in the kind of technology and product area. So it allows them to see, for example, takes their story, understands how people are engaging with it, give a live kind of view sort of throughout the day of how popular it is, where traffic's coming from. It also allows them to compare it to benchmarks. So if you've written a technology story, for example, you can compare it with other technology stories, or you can compare it with other stories that you've written as an author. So the context is quite important, I think, in terms of what's going on there. I think the other thing we've done with our editorial colleagues is spent quite a lot of time, having sessions with them where we'll talk them through the data. So, we'll spend an hour telling them some kind of interesting insights, maybe challenging some of the assumptions they might have. And we found that each one of those sessions we did kind of got more and more popular as people realised there was a lot of kind of benefit in it for them. So I think, like anything with data, dashboards and reports very well, but ultimately you kind of have to get out in front of people, talk them through it, and they have to be able to ask you questions, particularly journalists whose job it is to ask questions, really. And now I think the other thing to emphasise, of course, is that editorial independence is still very, very important and fundamental to the FT. So what we're not telling them is you must write this, you must write this. We're telling them this is the stuff that works, and if you want to be more engaging, then here's the kind of things to think about. Hopefully it helps us kind of get investment to make sure that we can do the things that we need to do. And I think also it brings data kind of more strategically to the fore. So when new developments are made in data, whether it's collection of new data, whether it's testing out new platforms, like putting some of the data on social media platforms, whether it's taking all of our metadata and trying to rationalise that, we can actually have a voice on the board which helps drive that. And we've come up with this concept of analytics first, which is new data sets that we want to develop have to be driven by an analytical need or requirement, rather than someone just saying, oh, let's collect this cool data set. Actually, it has to go through a kind of a process which says, well, does the analyst team need it? Are we going to use it? Can we get value from it before we start investing significant money in development? So it allows us to build stuff strategically. I think as we develop more products, so all kind of new things that we're developing have a very key kind of data component to them, whether it's rebuilding our website and we use data as the kind of the primary measurement for how successful that is. So it's completely fundamental to that, and in fact we are using the data to determine how and when we roll out the new website, because it has to reach certain thresholds of performing from a data perspective. Any new partnerships we're making kind of a filter through that data lens. So there's lots of opportunities at the moment for what we call internally distributed content, so putting our content on kind of third-party platforms, etc. And we know that unless we can get the data back from those platforms, it's very hard for us to read how successful those have been, whether it's driving reach or driving engagement of our existing customers. So it puts it very much at the fore there. And then I think the other area is it will help us more with working with editorial to get them, we've got the buy-in now, but continue to kind of drive their use of data and join up the kind of editorial focus with the commercial focus in terms of from a data perspective.